May 28, 1940. Berlin Reich Air Ministry. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring set aside an intelligence report, his disdain barely concealed. The report outlined President Roosevelt's request to Congress for a massive expansion of American aircraft, output an unprecedented 50,000 planes per year. They must be desperate if they think this propaganda can intimidate us. Göring told his aides, they know nothing about war production. Let them try turning car factories into aircraft factories. They'll soon see it's not just a matter of assembly lines. What Göring didn't realize was that in Detroit, a Danish immigrant named William Knudsen was already proving him wrong. The former General Motors president, now earning $1 a year as Roosevelt's production chief, was orchestrating the most ambitious industrial overhaul in history. Within 4 years, US factories would not only reach but nearly double the initially doubted 50,000 planes annually, supplying forces in 2 distant theaters of war simultaneously. Roosevelt's declaration, which had drawn German scorn, came on May 16, 1940. As German panzers stormed across France, speaking to Congress, Roosevelt stated, I want this nation prepared to produce at least 50,000 planes a year. Skepticism even came from allies. In 1939, the U.S. had built just 3,611 military aircraft, and the Army Air Corps had only 1,700 mostly outdated combat planes. Yet Roosevelt called for a 14-fold production surge. William Knudsen became the mastermind behind this transformation. When asked who could achieve such a feat, presidential advisor Bernard Baruch reportedly said, first Knudsen, second, Knudsen, third. Knudsen had left a $300,000 salary to serve his adopted country, applying mass production techniques from the automotive industry to aircraft manufacturing. The ramp-up began instantly. By December 1941, American factories were producing 2,000 military planes monthly, a 20-fold increase from 2 years prior. Ford announced a massive bomber plant at Willow Run, Michigan. Boeing expanded in Seattle. Douglas Aircraft hired thousands, and the arsenal of democracy was coming alive. Nazi leaders dismissed American potential, blinded by racial prejudice and ignorance. General Friedrich von Boedicke, German military, attached in Washington from 1933 to 1941, had reported accurately on U.S. industrial mobilization. His December 1940 cable warned, American war production will reach unimaginable levels. Berlin, however, ignored these assessments as defeatist exaggeration. When Boedicke met Hitler in February 1939 to discuss U.S. capabilities, Hitler ranted about racial degeneracy instead of intelligence reports, declaring Americans half Jewish, half African, and incapable of sustaining war. This ideological bias proved catastrophic. Prejudice tainted every level. Luftwaffe, intelligence dismissed reports of women working in aircraft factories as a sign of desperation. Unable to fathom that democratic mobilization could surpass totalitarian control. Reports of 3-shift operations were assumed to be The Nazi mindset simply could not grasp American reality. Ford's Willow Run plant became the symbol of U.S. ambition. Construction began on farmland on April 18, 1941, and it would become the largest single-roof factory in the world, 3.5 million square feet, with an assembly line stretching a mile. Charles Sorensen, Ford's production chief, vowed to produce 1 B-2 for Liberator bomber per hour, while other factories made 1 per day. Initial attempts were disastrous. The first bomber, completed in September 1942, had to be rebuilt entirely, with quality failures hitting 50%. By February 1943, Willow Run was producing only 56 bombers monthly, far below expectations, earning the nickname Will It Run. But Ford engineers pressed on, breaking the B-24's 488,193 parts into manageable sub-assemblies. They invented hydraulic riveting tools, prefabricated wiring harnesses, and moving assembly lines, accommodating 578 design changes in 1943 alone, while keeping production moving. By September, monthly output reached 148 bombers, and by December, 365. The turning point came in April 1944, when Willow Run churned out 428 B-24s, one every 63 minutes. Around the clock, this single factory surpassed the entire German aviation industry. German pilots first realized America's production dominance during the Tunisia campaign. Major Johannes, leading JG-77, observed in December 1942, American pilots are no longer amateurs. Even more alarming, their numbers grow daily. This realization intensified throughout 1943. On January 27, the first American bombing raid struck German soil, 64 bombers hitting Wilhelm. By October, during Black Thursday at Schweinfurt, the Americans could replace 60 lost B-17s within 2 weeks, making the arithmetic undeniable. During Big Week, February 20th to 25th, 1944, the 8th and 15th Air Forces flew 3,500 bomber sorties targeting German aircraft production. The Luftwaffe lost between 262 and 355 fighters. but more crucially, about 100 irreplaceable veteran pilots. General Adolf Galland informed Göring that Germany was losing 1,200 fighters monthly while producing 1,000, whereas America was producing 2,500 fighters and losing only 400. Major Heinz Baer, a German ace with 220 victories, recounted a January 1944 mission over Brunswick. The bomber stream stretched from horizon to horizon. At least 700 flying fortresses and Liberators, with only 8 fighters against hundreds. It was hopeless. By 1944, American aircraft output had reached unprecedented levels. With 96,270 planes produced that year alone, 16,048 for-engine bombers, 35,743 fighters, and 22,591 multi-engine aircraft, surpassing Germany's entire wartime production of roughly 94,677 planes. The gap was not just numerical. American bombers carried .50 caliber machine guns with thousands of rounds, powered turrets, advanced bomb sights, and sophisticated navigation. While German fighters often launched with partial ammo and lacked working radios, Boeing's Seattle plant produced 16 B-17s daily by May 1944. Douglas Aircraft, employing only 68 workers in 1936, had expanded to 167,000 across 9 plants. North American Aviation produced 500 P-51 Mustangs monthly. Lockheed manufactured 1 P-38 Lightning every 90 minutes, while implementing 2,127 combat-driven modifications. Supporting industries matched this pace. General Motors built 57,658 aircraft engines under license. Packard produced 55,523 Rolls-Royce Alcoa boosted aluminum output by 600%. And Dow Chemicals raised magnesium production from 6 million to 333 million annually. This industrial transformation shattered Nazi assumptions. Women, less than 1% of aircraft workers in 1941, made up 65% by 1943. Totaling 310,000 in the aircraft industry. At Douglas Long Beach, 22,380 of 41,620 employees were women. Roswell Monroe, the original Rosie the Riveter, riveted 3,000 pieces per shift at Willow Run with 99.5% accuracy. Female inspectors at Douglas cut defect rates from 3.2% to 0.3%. Ford redesigned tools for smaller hands, improving efficiency, while lighter pneumatic tools reduced fatigue, and better workstation layouts lowered injuries. German intelligence misread female employment as desperation. A captured Luftwaffe report dismissed them as temporary, predicting a collapse in quality. Instead, precision improved. Women excelled at wiring, instruments, and inspections, embodying democratic strength rather than weakness. As American production surged, Germany sank deeper into fantasy. Göring authorized the Jiger program in February 1944. Dispersing production into 729 underground sites using slave labor. The middle complex employed 60,000 prisoners in brutal conditions, with 20,000 dying. These underground factories generated more defects than aircraft. Laborers sabotaged parts and transporting materials between sites caused delays. Quality control broke down, and the entire middlework complex produced fewer engines monthly than Ford's Chicago plant. Meanwhile, American innovation accelerated. Boeing developed modular B-29 construction across 4 plants with fully interchangeable parts. The pressurized B-29, costing $65,000 each. Incorporated technologies Germany could not match even in prototypes. By early 1945, the United States was producing 100 B-29s each month. The scale of American production was fully evident on June 6, 1944, when the invasion deployed 11,590 Allied aircraft against just 319 German sorties, a 36-to-1 advantage. This was not merely a tactical edge, but the result of overwhelming industrial capacity. From January to May 1944, preparatory bombing had dropped 145,000 tons on German targets, surpassing the total German bombing of Britain over the entire war. Transport planes delivered 3 airborne divisions in a single day, using more aircraft than Germany's entire transport fleet had ever possessed. By December 1944, individual raids involved 1,200 bombers escorted by 900 fighters. P-51 Mustangs could reach Poland, matched any opponent in performance, and existed in numbers that made losses negligible. German pilots nicknamed them Indians for their constant, overwhelming presence. As defeat loomed, even the Nazi leadership recognized the scale of the production disaster. In December 1944, Goebbels wrote in his diary that Göring's promises of Luftwaffe superiority now seemed criminally diluted, noting, "We fight the world's greatest industrial power with rhetoric." Göring told his staff before D-Day that the Americans could lose 10 tanks for every 1 destroyed and still overwhelm them, adding that their material advantage would make any defensive position untenable. Hitler admitted to Speer in January 1945 that Berdicke's reports had been correct. The Americans' industrial capacity was decisive, producing tens of thousands while Germany built only hundreds. Albert Speer later testified that American bombing reduced German tank production by 35%, aircraft by 31%, and trucks by 42%, asserting that the systematic targeting of industrial facilities led directly to the collapse of German armaments. Germany's M262 jet fighter, operational by mid-1944, was genuinely advanced, 100 miles per hour faster than any Allied aircraft, and Hitler and Göring believed it could restore air superiority despite numerical inferiority. Yet only 1,430 were produced in total, with never more than 200 operational at once. Engines required maintenance every 10 hours, and shortages of critical materials forced substandard substitutes. Meanwhile, the U.S. had begun jet development in 1942. Though the Bell P-59 was inferior. Lockheed's P-80 Shooting Star, superior to any German jet, entered production before the war ended. American industrial depth allowed multiple technologies to be developed simultaneously, a luxury Germany could not afford. This contrast defined the outcome of the production war. German technological advances in jets were irrelevant against America's capacity to mass produce conventional fighters while developing next-generation aircraft. In total war, quality without quantity proved meaningless. Hermann Göring's arrest on May 8, 1945, by the U.S. 36th Infantry Division marked the start of his confrontation with reality. Initially, defiant at the interrogation facility in Augsburg, he claimed German technology had been superior and only overwhelmed by numbers. His transfer to Camp Ashkan in Luxembourg, a facility for high-ranking Nazi prisoners, led to intensive questioning. In July 1945, Major Kenneth Heckler conducted extensive interviews that documented Göring's growing acknowledgement of American industrial supremacy. "I knew American industrial potential was great," Göring admitted, "but the execution exceeded my worst fears. That single factory at Willow Run produced more aircraft than our entire bomber force at its peak. It was incomprehensible." He was especially astonished by American logistics, by the capacity to sustain forces across two oceans while keeping industry running at home. Such a scale lay beyond our imagination. We could not reliably supply units 500 miles from Germany. Yet the Americans kept armies provisioned 5,000 miles from their shores. At Nuremberg, prosecutors confronted Göring with overwhelming proof of U.S. production dominance. Charts demonstrated that by 1944, American monthly output exceeded what Germany produced in a year. Film of Willow Run's assembly lines rolled as prosecutors named German cities leveled by aircraft made at that single plant. Göring's March 14, 1946 testimony exposed his inability to grasp the magnitude. He acknowledged America's exceptional economic and technical strength, particularly in aviation, but insisted he never conceived they could raise aircraft production 100-fold in 4 years' growth. He had thought physically impossible. Prison psychologist G.M. Gilbert recorded Göring's preoccupation with statistics. Göring repeatedly ran comparisons, equating individual American plants with Germany's entire production and obsessively returning to Willow Run as that damned factory that broke our backs. When shown the engines tally, 812,615 built in America versus 241,675 in Germany, he simply stared. The arithmetic of defeat left no reply. The scale of the transformation is still staggering. From 3,611 military aircraft in 1940, the United States produced 295,959 by war's end, including 97,810 bombers, 99,465 fighters, and 98,684 other types. That output represented more than volume. It signified systemic superiority across every part of the production process. At peak, roughly 2 million Americans worked in aircraft manufacture, drawn from an unprecedentedly diverse pool: women, African Americans, Mexican Americans, Native Americans, people with disabilities, teenagers, and the elderly. This democratic mobilization achieved what authoritarian orders could not: voluntary cooperation that outperformed forced labor on every metric. Those who entered factories in 1941 with no aircraft experience became by 1945 the world's most skilled aviation workforce. They did more than assemble planes. They reinvented industrial production. Statistical quality control developed for bomber manufacture became standard practice worldwide, and automation concepts pioneered at Willow Run reshaped global manufacturing. The engineers who laid out bomber assembly lines would later design the Saturn V rocket. The women who riveted B-24s would raise the generation that walked on the moon. The production miracle did not stop with victory. It launched America's post-war ascendancy. The financial scale defied orthodox expectations. Aircraft production consumed $45 billion in 1940s dollars, roughly $800 billion today, and the B-29 program alone cost more than the Manhattan Project. Rather than bankrupt the country, wartime production generated unprecedented prosperity. Depression-era unemployment disappeared, and personal incomes, doubled between 1940 and 1945. Much of the expansion was financed by workers themselves through war bond purchases. Willow Run employees alone bought $45 million in bonds that helped fund their plant's operations. Germany, by contrast, devoted 40% of its industrial capacity to aircraft. By 1944, yet produced less than half of American output. Reliance on slave labor proved disastrously counterproductive. Sabotage became common. Quality fell, and productivity per German worker declined after 1943, while American productivity rose by 300%. The wartime production network became the base for post-war prosperity. Aluminum smelters built for bombers supplied materials for suburban housing. Chemical plants that made aviation fuel spawned plastics for consumer goods. And machine tool factories that served aircraft plants equipped American industry for global leadership. Organizational excellence matched raw output. The War Production Board coordinated some 184,000 companies. IBM punch card systems tracked millions of parts across thousands of suppliers. And MIT's radiation laboratory, employing about 4,000 scientists, developed navigation systems that gave American bombers all-weather capability, when combat exposed the B-17's weakness to head-on attacks. Boeing fitted chin turrets within 2 months. When the Pacific Theater demanded greater range, modified B-24s were consolidated into new configurations without halting output. German factories took months or years to adapt. American factories turned changes into weeks. That speed of innovation proved as important as sheer numbers. Aircraft improvements were continuous and driven by frontline experience. Lessons from battles in the Pacific reached Atlantic production lines in days. In contrast, planes made in isolated underground German plants with slave labor remained largely unchanged. The tight loop linking combat to manufacture ran with historic efficiency. Pilots. Reports reached engineers almost instantly. Engineers' fixes reached the assembly lines within days. And shop floor suggestions went straight to designers. That open, horizontal flow of information beat the rigid German command chain. On October 15, 1946, just hours before his execution, Hermann Göring penned a final letter that conceded the core lesson. The Americans won by industrial might, rather than superior soldiers. It was not battlefield genius, but factory output that buried us beneath aluminum and steel. His last words to prison psychologist G.M. Gilbert were stark. We declared war on an industrial giant while it slept. Once it woke, defeat was inevitable. Göring killed himself that night, but his closing statements remain a blunt verdict on the production warfare. Marshall, who had scoffed at American capability, died knowing a single U.S. plant had produced more aircraft than his Air Force ever had. Historians now place American industrial achievement at the center of Allied victory. Without the material advantage it supplied, D-Day could not have been mounted, the bombing offensive could not have been sustained, and the Pacific Campaign would have been unwinnable. As Richard Overy put it, the result was decided not by courage or tactics, but by the sheer weight of material. The Allies did not merely win battles, they buried their enemies under production. By 1944, the United States was turning out more military aircraft than the rest of the world combined Axis and Allied. Alike an advantage measured in orders of magnitude rather than percentages. Germany faced not merely defeat, but erasure. The production miracles, meaning reached beyond victory on the battlefield. It became an argument for democracy over dictatorship, for free cooperation over coerced labor. The workers who achieved this were citizens acting by choice, not conscripts, and that voluntary mobilization outperformed forced labor in every measurable way. Göring's contempt for American industry stands as one of history's worst His refusal to accept democratic productive capacity cost Germany the war and many lives, sealing the Third Reich's fate long before the First. Allied bomber crossed the Rhine. The jump from a few thousand planes to scores of thousands annually showed that free societies, when faced with existential threat, could achieve what once seemed impossible. American labor did not merely meet Roosevelt's once derided target, they doubled it. They didn't simply match German output, they outproduced it many times over while simultaneously fighting across the Pacific. Modern leaders would be wise to remember Göring's error, underestimating peaceful democracies because they prize prosperity over aggression invites catastrophic In 1940, America seemed ill-prepared for war. By 1944, it had become an industrial colossus whose factories mattered as much as its armies. The arsenal of democracy proved that production lines could be as decisive as front lines, that assembly workers could be as crucial as soldiers, and that industrial mobilization could determine victory as surely as battlefield strategy. From his scoffing response to Roosevelt's May 1940 declaration to his execution at Nuremberg in October 1946, Göring's arc tracked the Third Reich's collapse. Ideology confused with capability. Tyranny, mistaken for strength, Racial myth believed able to outmatch industrial arithmetic. The Reichsmarshal, who mocked American aircraft production, died knowing U.S. factories had produced in 1944 more planes than Germany managed in the entire war. His ridicule of democratic industry became history's most expensive joke, paid for in total defeat. America produced 295,959 military aircraft. Germany produced 94,677. Yet the true victory lay not simply in those totals but in method. Free workers outproduced enslaved labor. Democratic cooperation outperformed authoritarian command. And a nation of immigrants and diverse citizens united to accomplish the extraordinary. The B-24s rolling off Willow Run every 63 minutes were more than machines. They were democracy's answer to tyranny. Rivets driven by women who had been homemakers months earlier. Engines assembled by teenagers who left school to serve. Wings put together by workers who had escaped poverty and prejudice. Together they buried oppression beneath an avalanche of production. Göring sneered at the idea of 50,000 American planes a year. The United States responded with twice that number in altered world history. His laughter now sounds like the echo of catastrophic miscalculation. The leader who understood neither democracy nor mass production was ultimately buried, along with all he stood for, under some 300,000 aircraft that transformed his scorn into history's most